The mum's gonna see that.
Would you like to come in, find a seat, bunch up, because there's a lot of people hanging around the door there. So come right in, loads of seats here to my right. Come and make yourself comfortable. Still plenty of seats over on this side, so come on through. We'll pause until you've sat yourselves down there. Yeah. Yeah. Right, I think that's it. It's good to see you all still here. And I'm Rachel Maskell. I'm the MP for York Central, Labour and Co-op MP. Been the MP since 2015. Thank you. And I hope there's lots of support in the room. But this is a cross-party event. And of course, it's about the debate, and it's about what comes from the debate, which is really important. And of course, coming to a city like York, we've got a huge political history. Not many of you may realise, but it was actually in York where one of the most important political debates ever happened, and that was around slavery. And it was the cells and, of course, Wilberforce and all of the incredible debate that happened. And of course, after 25 years of campaigning, we saw the abolition of slavery. They're the kind of decisions that happen in York. So as you're having your discussions over today and tomorrow, remember this is a place of really exciting political determinations. And hopefully out of the debate, where people come with different views, we walk away with a settled mind of what the future can be. And York is at such a crossroads. So to have the Big Tent Festival here at such a time is really exciting for us to host. But less about York and more about your next speaker. So Baroness Varzy is no stranger to York. In fact, having two Yorkshire women on the stage is a good thing, but also very much knows York, having done some studying here, been involved with Joseph Rowntree Trust here, and very much welcome in our city. And the thing that would have changed since you were here is that York has become England's human rights city. So we are recognised and hold the chair this year for human rights, championing diversity, which I know something that you're passionate about as well, but really making York an inclusive city, which is something this festival is all about too. So it's a real delight to have somebody that always speaks their mind, doesn't compromise, and goes out there to really make political debate far more interesting. So I'm delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you very much for that really kind and warm welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, why do politicians turn out on a Friday night when they could be sitting out in the sun in their garden? Well, we do so because we like to have nice things said about us. Thank you for that. Yeah, you did ask what you wanted me to say, and you didn't mention the accolade that I asked you to mention. And that, ladies and gentlemen, the accolade that I am most proud of is that in 2007, I was voted the sexiest member of the House of Lords. It was an online poll, and my wonderful... Yeah. Well, listen, I had my own teeth, right? So I was in the running. And in a house where the average age is 71 at 36, I was in the running. But my wonderful husband, who sits at the back of the room, it was an online poll. He stayed up all night and he voted and he voted and he voted so that I could consistently tell him thereafter that he's married to the sexiest member of the House of Lords. But ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to talk about a politician. You might think I want to talk about the politician of the moment, but I want to talk about a politician that is somebody who was incredibly special to me. And it's somebody that I want to remember today, and that is Jo Cox. And today is 7 years since the passing of Jo Cox. And the reason why I mention her is not just because she is a huge loss to politics, not just because she was somebody that I held very dear, not just because she was in the neighboring constituency where I was born and raised, but because I want to tell you an interesting and funny story. I remember in 2016, I think it was, not long after that election, where actually in the run-up to that election, before Joe was actually elected, when I received a phone call from number 10, it was quite late in the evening, and it was quite a kind of important call from Ed Llewellyn, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. And he said, "We need to speak to you urgently. Number 10 is concerned." And I said, "Fine, I'm happy to take this." Stepped out, I took this call, and they said, "We understand that you're doing an event tonight with Jo Cox in the run-up to the election." And I said, "Yes, I am doing an event tonight with Jo Cox. She's a wonderful person who works across party political lines, and we're talking about something that we both care about, inclusivity and diversity." And I said, "But is there an issue?" And they said, "Well, we hear a rumor that you may be defecting to the Labour Party." I said, "Well, I can just assure you, Ed, and you can let the Prime Minister know that if I was defecting, I would not be doing it on a Sunday night in Batley." But if there was ever anybody who could convince you that you needed to work across party political lines and maybe even step across that house, it was Jo Cox. And she reminded us how what mattered most was not the color of your politics, but actually the passion and the principle behind your politics. And what the theme of today's kind of evening, the day that we've had with the Leadership Summit, and of course the festival tomorrow, is all about, is finding those spaces where we can find shared futures and where we can find shared ideas. And we've seen, if you look across the political divide at the moment, I did a program with Alistair Campbell called Make Me Prime Minister. Alistair and Rory do this podcast, one of the most popular political podcasts out there, because it's across party political lines. Some of the amazing work that I've done has been with colleagues, people like Wes Streeting, on issues around racism. The APPG on compassion, which I work with Debbie Abrahams on, again, across party political lines. And the very foundations of what we are doing here today, set by my amazing colleague, George Freeman, who's in the room somewhere. Big up for George. And of course, Baron, who again has had a phenomenal political career. And why is that important? Because in the end, the really tough solutions to the really tough problems are only going to be found when we put ideology aside and we start thinking in ways which are pragmatic. I want to end on this because I really hope we're going to have a two-way conversation. When I think about people who go that extra mile and reach out across party political lines, I have to mention one man, a Liberal Democrat who for years and years stood by the side of somebody who was not a Liberal Democrat, and who sat through Conservative Association dinner after Conservative Association dinner, being the wine fairy, and that's my husband. So coalitions, ladies and gentlemen, come in many forms, and I was very lucky to have the Platinum Plus one, the Liberal Democrat, who made sure that we had Conservative wins for years. But I'll take any questions over to whoever's going to be doing that. Okay.
You talk about cross-partisan, cross-party work, but I'm a foreigner, I'm sorry about that. And I think I'm shocked about how partisan the politics are in this country. And so when I hear you advocate cross-party discussion, and you have been, but it's frightening how biased and how aggressive the system is. And I only, come from a little country where, of course, we have proportional representation. And I do think that would help a hell of a lot in having a less nasty political conversation.
Okay. Well, in this country, when we didn't have proportional representation, so we in 2010 had a coalition cabinet, and that was the cabinet that I was a part of. Some of the most amazing work that I had the opportunity to do was alongside people like Nick Clegg. And actually, or whatever your political stripes are, the nature and the way in which the Clegg-Cameron partnership worked during those coalition years. And I saw that both in terms of them working together in a public forum, but I also saw them individually and the respect that they had for each other when they didn't necessarily have to put up their best front in front of each other. So there is precedent in this country for people to reach out and work across political divides. I would say that the issue right now is not the fact that we're not working across party political lines. The concern that I have is the corrosion of politics itself. And it's, you know, it's prevalent not just in a political party. Of course, we're the party of government. The spotlight is more prominent on us, and therefore we will see more of that than we will see in other political parties. But I have a real concern about the way in which people do not seem to understand that there are some fundamental principles in this country, the rule of law, democracy, the kind of things that we talk about as values which generations of people have fought for and lost their lives for, which we seem so easily to be able to push aside. And so what I want to see alongside people reaching across and working is a sense of understanding the gravitas of the moment when you are asked to serve your country. Because these are huge offices of state. And maybe as the daughter of an immigrant mill worker, that moment for me in 2010 felt momentous because it felt like a country that my grandfather had come to as a foreigner to work as a migrant worker. The fact that that country had provided the opportunity and the privilege to his granddaughter to serve her nation as he had served as part of the British Indian Army when he was in uniform, that to me gave me the sense of whatever my views were, personal ambitions were, you know, whatever that may be, that in the end, the importance of that job, that role, that the privilege of serving. And I want the debate to come back to people understanding how important that is. And that means not doing government by WhatsApp. That means not being able to break the law, you know, willy-nilly. That means not diminishing your status. That means using language which is conducive to bringing people together. That means not fighting culture wars. These things are really important because, as I keep saying, and you know, I'm reading a book at the moment called How to Be a Patriot by Sundar Katwala. I think he's going to be here tomorrow. It's about stepping back and saying, if you are a true patriot, then you behave in ways which bring calm and ease to your nation. And if you use language and behave in ways which creates angst and divide, then you're not a patriot. Actually, you're an arsonist in my book. And we've got to call out what I call arsonist politics.
Thank you. I'm Kleiner from Make Votes Matter, and just want to say, so we now have all of the opposition parties with official policy for proportional representation. But most excitingly for me, actually last year we helped relaunch Conservative Action for Electoral Reform at the Conservative Party. So much more interest in the Conservative Party for a fair voting system now. And in the past, there was a huge amount back in the 70s when the Conservatives won more votes and the Labour Party was able to form a government. It happens in both directions. So that's really exciting for me that there are now kind of Conservatives who are really passionate about making sure that every vote is counted, every voice is heard, and that we have a country that we all get a say in how decisions are made. So just would like to invite you maybe to come along to the next event at Conservative Party conference.
I mean, I hear the case. I see the case for proportional representation. The concern that I have and have always had is that when there have been moments in this country where we've had large numbers of votes cast for far-right parties. And thankfully, this country has not elected in any substantial way members of the far right. And what concerns me is that once you start to legitimize some of those views through elected office, and PR could lead to that, you start to shift the center of political debate on some of those issues. And that's the only concern that I would have with PR, to say, when every vote matters, of course, every vote should matter, but then some really awful votes start to matter. And when they start to matter in politics, then we shift the center of gravity on what is considered to be a decent space on these issues. But I'm happy to come and have a conversation.
Right at the back there.
Sorry.
My wife and I are big fans of yours. After we saw you win the stand-up competition on TV, big fan of yours on Twitter as well. But we do sometimes watch you and read you. I wonder if you ever wonder why you're still in the Conservative Party. So, do you ever wonder, and do you ever think about doing anything about that wondering?
Yeah. Yeah. There is a fantastic tradition of one nation centre ground conservatives. And when often people say to me that you're concerned, you seem to have an issue with aspects of your party, I always say to them, can I just remind you of the cabinet that I sat around? I sat around the table with David Cameron. I sat around the table with Ken Clarke, Dominic Grieve, Justine Greening, David Willits, William Hague, need I go on, right? And this great tradition of centre ground politicians with huge gravitas, people with whom we would often disagree with each other, but there was always a baseline understanding. And the question I always ask myself when often we hear some other mad story coming out of Westminster is, would this have happened under David? Would this have happened under John Major? Would this have happened under Margaret Thatcher? And invariably my answer is no. So the issue is not Conservative Party and the great historical amazing party that is. The issue is how today we interpret conservative values. And if we vacate the space, and sadly we have lost so many of our colleagues from that centre ground, if those of us who can't be vacated from that, nicest way of putting it, because we're there for life, laws, one advantage, you kind of, you're there for life. I think if we start vacating it, then one, we're admitting defeat. Secondly, we're actually being disloyal to this great tradition of conservatism. And thirdly, where does the fight back start? Right? So we've got to stay and we've got to fight to make sure we bring this party and keep this party in the center ground of politics, because that's where elections should be fought. And that's where elections should be fought and won. Because in the end, the only two big things that we should ever be arguing about in politics, left or right, is how much we're going to tax and how much we're going to spend. And the rest of all the malarkey around the culture wars and the rubbish and the language and all of that stuff is actually material. It's about how much money is the country going to make, how much of that is the state going to take, and how much of that is the state going to spend on which priorities. And once we get back to that center ground of politics, and those of us who are in that kind of what I consider tradition of old-fashioned one nation conservatives, we've got to stay and fight. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I think it would be almost impossible for me to ever leave the Conservative Party. There may be a moment, but seriously, guys, did I think I was part of Operation Black Vote? I spent 6 years with the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. There was a fabulous moment when I was made chairman of the party in 2010, because they'd say, Saida Varsi has just been made chairman of the Conservative Party. She served 6 years on the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, and everybody's going, you what? How do we square this circle? I think the Conservative Party is a really broad church. It includes people from lots of backgrounds and different traditions. And I just think that we've got to stay, and we've got to make sure we keep that tradition going.
Can I take these two, and then maybe Two more after that.
Okay, I'll keep my answers shorter.
Keep the answers and we'll give questions.
If you were Prime Minister right now, what would be your top priority?
I'd sack the Home Secretary. Are they short enough for you?
So going back to your answer on kind of proportional representation, do you ever wonder if that kind of having proportional representation would make people feel more listened to, and that in fact might drive people away from extremes? Because I think that so much of the nature of extremist politics is when people feel so desperate.
I think for me, I'm not convinced. I have to be straight with you. I'm not convinced on PR. And I spent a lot of time in 2012, it was, during the AV referendum, which at the time I was chairman. I had the privilege of leading that campaign, and really gave it a lot of thought as to the alternative ways in which we could be voting in this country. And in the end, and maybe it's my migrant past, maybe it's because I've been an outsider for large parts of my life, I genuinely felt concern about what that system could throw up and what that would mean in terms of legitimizing a certain discourse in public life. So I'm not going to agree with you, because at the moment I'm not convinced on PR. I'll take the next question.
Are you all right? Couple more
Yeah.
Brilliant. So if we take the dean over here, and then the person in the pink dress.
Oh, the dean is going to ask a question.
When we're on his ground.
I know, and normally at this moment, I usually say, "Oh my God," and the dean will say, "I don't think it's him who's about to ask you the question."
That's certainly true. And I'd love to come in on the PR thing, as I grew up voting Liberal for many years, but I've been to Palestine and Israel about 100 times, and that's the argument against PR. But that actually isn't why I wanted the microphone. I have to play to my trade, and in an era where I think everyone in and around this big tent recognizes the demise of centrist politics, not just in this country, but across the West. I've just come back from living in the States for 7 years. Oh my word. I want to ask you, as a person of faith and a person of a different faith to my own faith, what do you think the role of faith communities can be in trying to preserve the center ground where we speak to each other politely?
Okay, great question. I was a minister for faith for 2 years when I was in government. And for those people who are not convinced as you and I are, I had this great nickname. They used to call me the minister for fairies, goblins, and imaginary friends. And interesting, I used to get that grief was because I opened up the debate about faith in public life and the importance of what drives people of faith. And actually, long before people start proselytizing, the good that comes out of the active faith, the good deeds that come out of people who are motivated by faith. And now, because I'm also Dean menopausal, I've forgotten your question. What can we do together as faith? It's like Dory, isn't it? In Finding Nemo. Okay, we're back. So it's for me, when I was in government, what I used to say was, let's not talk about faith per se, but let's talk about what faith can do. So both from domestic, the Near Neighbours program was something that was developed in opposition before we came to government, and we implemented it in government. It was called Active Faith in Opposition, and then we developed it and delivered it with the Church of England being used as a core to bring in other faith communities, using its concept of being responsible for all its parishioners, whatever their religion was. We made sure that actually being from a faith community didn't bar you from working with government. We brought in a program of faith literacy. Overseas, we engaged faith both in DFID and in the FCO as a way of finding solutions. We had a huge conference on preventing sexual violence in conflict, and faith was a core part of that. I was the Minister for Human Rights, and I made freedom of religion and belief one of my priorities. I think talking about it, the number of times my conservative Christian colleagues in cabinet would say, you've actually given us the confidence to start talking about faith. And I think in 2014, when I left government, actually resigned over the issue of Gaza, on the issue of Palestine, because I felt our government's policy was morally indefensible. I actually a lot of horrible things written at the time, but one of the nicest things that was written kind of made me feel like it doesn't matter what faith you come from, you can actually argue for the case for faith, was I think it was either the Church Times or the Tablet who said, today the church has lost its strongest friend in government. And the fact that I happen to be a British Muslim, and I wore that as a huge badge of honor to say we can reach across faiths, and whereas so many people can often see it as a means of unease and division, I genuinely believe that faith is a huge source of strength for people and has the potential to bring people together. So there's lots and lots of practical things. I still think a lot of it has fallen off the table a little bit at the moment, and we do need to bring it back, but it always needs a champion, which is why I always argued that we should have faith sitting around the table. We're not talking about theocracy here, but we're talking about a faith being an informer of the debate along with all the other issues, and it should sit at the cabinet table. That portfolio should sit at the cabinet table. So I hope it does return.
Can we try and take 2 questions?
Okay.
Well,
2 very quick questions. So given you mentioned one, okay. So I'll delete one of them. You might be slightly biased. Thoughts on the future of the House of Lords and the reform that it might need?
Yep.
Actually, this could be a question for everyone, but as you're centre stage, it's directed at you. Imagine you go to sleep tonight and you have a really fabulous sleep, absolutely delicious. You wake up in the morning and a miracle has happened. What would that miracle be for you?
Wow.
I asked that question to everyone in the room.
You know what that miracle would be? It would be that at my age, being menopausal, if I had a full night's sleep without going to the toilet 3 times, that would be the miracle. If I didn't wake up in the middle of the night with a hot flush, that would be a miracle. But I think, on a more serious note, what would the miracle be that I want to see tomorrow? A really short thing. I would just like the government to find a much more kinder, compassionate way to deal with the small boats issue. These are desperate people coming to our shores. We're not talking about open borders, but we are talking about, we're talking about us being a compassionate nation. And if you look at the world, some of the poorest countries host the most number of refugees and asylum seekers. We're a first world nation, whatever the challenges are in this country. And that first world nation isn't just about putting, our money where our mouth is, but it's also putting our heart into it. And I want us to look back at this time and not see it as a period when we stepped away from values that were really hard fought. So that's the miracle that I'd like to see, a change, a moment. The Home Secretary's gone and we now have a new policy. The question on the House of Lords can't exist as it is. There are 800 members. It should not be more than 400. It definitely should not be more than the Commons. Advantages to what the House is like today. Huge expertise, ex-head of the armed forces, ex-head of the intelligence services, heads of industry, business, faith, bishops, crossbenchers. I mean, it's a phenomenal, amazing scientists. When you listen to the debate, and I say this with all due respect to George in the room, and the Commons are amazing, but the quality of debate in the Lords is something else. I was listening to Baroness Butler-Sloss last week on the migration bill, And I mean, she just blew my mind. Just listen to somebody like Lord Dubs on these issues. You know, these are phenomenal parliamentarians for whom the House of Commons is not the right space, right? The House of Lords is the right space. So we have to preserve the best of what it has and take away the bits that currently aren't working. So look at active membership. I think membership should not be for life. I think it should be for a term of 10 years with the potential to renew for a further 10 years. Anything more than that, 20. There should be some sort of a sense of should there be a retirement date, which I'm still out on. You know, listen to somebody like Baroness Butler-Sloss, who's in her late 80s and is amazing, and you think, well, actually, should it be 90? But then there are other people, you know, who could be in their 40s. And I said to my husband once, I said, you know, in the House of Lords, you get these big beasts. And I said, they're phenomenal. And I said, but then age and other things kick in. And then, you know, they're not at their best. And, you know, sometimes I said, I kind of feel for them. And I feel like, you know, they're not making sense. And I said, you know, if you love me, sweetheart, I said, really, I said, there must come a moment when I get to that stage, don't let me go to the House of Lords and bring me home. And he said, so what you're saying to me is when you stop speaking sense, I've got to bring you back. He says, well, as a Lib Dem, it's time to come home, love.
So thank you very much. My job tonight, I'm George Freeman, Member of Parliament for Mid-Norfolk, founder of the Big Tent, Minister for Science. Three things to say. Firstly, a big thank you to you and to Rachel for what you've just said and what you've embodied. It is the spirit of the Big Tent. And I just want to share with you that in life, in politics, in business, in religion, in any endeavor, you need people who are prepared to take a bit of a risk. And when we set up the Big Tent, it was born in 2017 in a horror at what the referendum, not the result of the referendum, but the mechanism of the referendum had done to our politics. And when I rang up others, they all agreed with me, had never seen such a horrifically vicious, divisive, intolerant, shrill, violent MP murdering destruction of all that is unwritten in our constitution, but which this country holds dear. A tradition of disagreement with dignity, good conversation, civic engagement, calling MPs in the House of Commons, even if you violently disagree with everything they stood for, honourable, because they've been elected by people in a place to serve. All of that seemed to go out of the window in a few weeks of appalling politics. I'm not talking about the result, I'm talking about the way that campaign was conducted. And I suspect in our lives, all of us can remember where we were at certain points. I'm not old enough to remember where I was when Jack Kennedy was killed, but that for a generation was a big moment. I remember where I was when Elvis Presley died. I was with my mother who started crying. I remember where I was when Princess Diana died. But I think all of us remember where we were when Joe Cox was killed. It was a moment. A really horrific moment in our politics. And I'm really proud tonight that Rachel, Labour MP here for York, a great MP with whom I work very closely, and many people don't see in Parliament how much we work together. We agree about 80, 90% most of the time. It's the 10% of disagreement, which is all you see on the television. And it's just wonderful, Rachel, that, where are you? Taken the risk to have us here and to rise above tribal politics and to welcome the Big Tent into your constituency. And so it's just wonderful, Saida, to hear you speak and remind us of all that everyone who's here holds dear, and politicians who are prepared to speak, who hold conviction, who are prepared to speak to it and stand for it in the House of Lords as well as the House of Commons. And it was in that spirit that we set up Big Tent. It was intended to be the opposite of a party political conference, a place where ministers don't turn up in suits and turn up at the last minute, give a speech and leave, where food is good, the drink is good, you're rooted in a place, you celebrate its culture, you don't turn up behind wire limousines and leave, you engage in the place, you listen to people, you hand them the microphone. Just, I could go on. Anyone ever been to a party conference? Right. Well, tell us if we're not getting there, but this is designed to be the opposite. And when in doubt, when anyone says, what should we do? I just imagine what you do at a party conference and do the opposite. And so my first point really is, to you both, thank you. Could you show your appreciation for these two great women? And I can't pay any greater tribute to the memory of Jo Cox than to stand here with you and to invite you to celebrate two great women in politics from different sides of the divide, from both ends of our parliament, speaking with real conviction, love, passion, commitment to public service and to those things that Jo Cox held very dear. So this is our 7th festival. First was in Reading, second in Cambridge, fourth in Coventry, my maths is bad, 5th in Bristol, 6th. This is our 6th festival. And part of, so this piece is about place. We're not here by accident. The Big Tent is about convening conversations for people in places, about places, for and by people. It's about bringing the microphone to a place outside of the Chamber of Parliament to give voice to the people in their place, to talk about their place and the people in it, and to shift the dynamic. Because, of course, Parliament is 650 MPs and 800 peers there to represent this country and to speak for the people, the places that they one way or another care for and serve. And we do our best. But I think there's a general sense around this country that the people and the places who aren't directly represented through that imperfect system also need the microphone and also need a voice. And so we've been around the country. And I want just to say something about why we're here in York. Firstly, Yorkshire is, I mean, I come from Norfolk, which gave you our greatest military hero, the seeds of the agricultural revolution, and our first prime minister. So this sticks in the craw. But I think everyone would admit that Yorkshire is one of, if not our great counties. And we're a profoundly devolutionary movement. The Big Tent is about insisting that a proper reconstituted, renewed state must give more power back to the units, the places in which people will give their allegiance. And it's an article of faith for us that people will do things for the people and places they love far more than they'll ever do for any government, however good and however benign. And we're here in England's first and largest, maybe greatest county. We're here in the grounds of York Minster, not by accident. And thank you, Dean, and all the chapter for having us. We're here because this is a great centre of faith. And you touched on it beautifully, that at the heart of the Big Tent is a belief in faith. My children, I did a deal with my wife, my ex-wife, that they'd be brought up as Norwich City fans, provided I could bring them up as Anglicans. And my argument was, faith, you need to be introduced to faith. You can reject it very easily. But it's quite difficult to discover faith unless somebody helps you to discover. And to me, faith has a very powerful secular element as well. And in some ways, politics, democratic politics, is the expression of a small f faith. We all took a rind in the grounds of a great, great bastion of faith by no coincidence. One of the things our country has to do is to bring together people of different faiths and different religions and different races and different traditions in a spirit of natural national unity, and to insist that patriotism is not populism and popularity isn't born of populism. Proper popularity is earned by speaking truth about people and place. And so we're in York as a great city, a great home, a great beacon in the grounds of a great minster to make the case for faith, small f and big F, as an important part of a properly diverse and mixed society. Don't take it from me, take it from our next guest, who's going to join on the video screen with a welcome message. Ladies and gentlemen, would you put your hands together for the Archbishop?
I'm Stephen, the Archbishop of York, and I want to welcome you to York and to Dean's Park for the Radix Big Tent Festival, an opportunity for all of us to think about what kind of world we want to live in, what are the values we want to live by, how will we set our compass, who will we follow, a chance to talk about what kind of world do we want to live in and how we will get there. Sometimes as a Christian leader, people say to me, oh, the church shouldn't get involved in politics. The church is concerned with spiritual things. Well, when I hear that, I wonder what Bible they've been reading. But most of all, I want to say as a Christian, my Christian faith is about the whole of life. Spiritual for me doesn't mean something unearthly and unworldly. It means the values by which I live my life. And the Christian faith, because it's involved in the whole of life, because it has a vision of what it means to love one another and build a society of peace and justice, we have a voice in the affairs of the world. And I think this festival is about opening all our voices, because usually it's when we work together and listen to one another's perspectives that we are most likely to find the best ways forward. May you be richly blessed in your time together here in York.
So my last message is simply this. Tomorrow we have the most amazing program. If you haven't looked at it, please do. It's all online and printed out. Do not miss the start. At 10 a.m. we have an extraordinary range of speakers, from Vince Cable to the Mayor of York, to Greg Dyke. Where is he? Greg's here somewhere. Those are just three of the names. It's an extraordinary lineup, and we set the festival up like a festival. There are tents that you could sit in all day, and there are people you can move around between and hook up with different conversations. So please don't get up, listen to the test match and come at 12, because you will miss the beginning. And you can get the test match in the bar there. They've got a TV screen and we'll give you regular updates. Can I just say, you're not here, any of you, by accident. This is the Leadership Summit, the eve of the festival. You're all handpicked because you have a part to play in this. So please, if you haven't met everyone, if you don't know who you're talking to, say hello, introduce yourself. This is about galvanizing change. And thank you all for your time, the most precious commodity any of us have. And I'll see you in the morning at 5 to 10 for what's set to be a spectacular day.